Thanks, Ross. This is based on a musical sing-along that I do every year or so for a conference down south that I go to. Next, please. It started out as a Histrion song. And then we have the Glengarry, please. That's, we talked about this when I was last speaking about the Argylls, the formation of the 7th Battalion, the biggest hat badge in the British Army, the Thin Red Line and so on. And a lot of the illustrations and songs come from a book called Kiss Me Goodnight, Sergeant Major. You can see that. Ross, could you, yeah, thanks. Introduction by Spike Milligan, who's Hitler, My Part in His Downfall is a very funny book if you haven't read it. And that shows a sailor engaging with an Argyll's sergeant. Again, next, please. And again. Now, the trick here is I'd like the participants to choose one of these 6 infantry battalions. The battalions are, let's say, 850 soldiers, and we're the point units. So I want you to pick one number and continue to identify with them as the story unfolds. 1st, 2nd, 6th, 7th, 9th, and 15th. Next, please. So I would have everybody to sing Roll Out the Barrel. You can sing it in your own homes if you wish. Roll out the barrel, we'll have a barrel of fun. Roll out the barrel, we've got the blues on the run, and so on. Next, please. This is a territorial force battalion practicing, some soldiers from it practicing bayonet thrusts. Next. This is when you're coming in to the dates. So you've made your battalion choice now, so you can see where you are. If you're the 1st, the original 91st Regiment, you are in Palestine being confronted by Arab terrorists. If you're the 2nd, you're in India and you get sent by sea to Singapore at this stage. The 6th are leaving Renfrewshire with cheering crowds and so on. So you can read your own little bit. Next, we have a picture of the 2nd Battalion in India being inspected. Look at that, fine imperial stuff. And then we have, I think, the 7th Battalion along the Ochils doing some practice before they go away. And then we have Vera Lynn. We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through just like you always do, till the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away. Next, please. These are Argylls in France dug in. And the next song is a spoof song about a machine gun. I'll take the tripod and you take the gun, and you'll be in action before me. And if you get shot, then I'll take the bloomin' lot. And I'll eat your iron rations in the morning. Now we're doing 6-month chunks. So the next chart shows what's happening between January and June 1940. The 1st Battalion is now fighting Jewish terrorists. So it's all very complicated. But they get swimming, they have golf, they have Highland Games. And the 2nd Battalion are in Singapore, where they notably got into major fights with the Australians. But their new commanding officer decided that jungle training might be useful. And you'll see a picture shortly that shows them practicing fighting in the jungle. Singapore was famous for being outward facing and not really being worried about the jungle, because no one could come down through the jungle. But the Japanese did, as we know. We can see the 7th Battalion is on the Maginot Line, and they finish up at Saint-Valery, and over half of them are captured. And then next, please, this is the jungle fighting practice. And this was so innovative that the Argylls formed the final rear guard as the British Army collapsed out of Malaya. And the officer commanding was taken out, much against his will, to form a jungle fighting school. The next one is a very rude song, so we'll move on quickly to the cartoon, and we'll just leave that. You can look the words up if you wish. I'm sensitive about the concerns of some of our audience. But this is what the 51st Highland Division looked like in 1940. The divisional troops and engineers and so on, but these are the infantry units. And you'll see, if you see a low number, it's a regular formation. Higher numbers are territorial force or territorial army. And the local battalion of the Argylls, the 7th, is down there in the 154 Brigade. There's a story that's put around that they were abandoned by Churchill, and it's just nonsense. Britain was in a formal alliance with France, which wasn't the case with the Americans later in the war. But a formal alliance meant that British units were rotating under French command, and the 51st were on the Maginot Line, as you can see in the next picture. Can I see the next slide? Thanks, Ross. So this is a defensive structure that the French had built to avoid trench warfare. It's a very, very strong defensive structure. But the 51st, at the time the Germans broke through, they were part of a French army corps. Next, please. And they were fighting a rearguard action against the Germans. They were cut off at Saint-Valery. At that stage, the 154th Brigade had been detached, and there were major efforts. Look, the next map, please, to see the situation. You can see Dunkirk quite far to the north of where they were, and they're in a situation where they actually asked their corps commander, could they be evacuated? And he said no. He told them they had to stay. And finally, the British sent out the Royal Navy initiative to look at, to try and get them out. But they didn't have the wide beaches that there were at Dunkirk. Next, please. And the issue then was they can't get into this small port in the fog. That's the commanding General Fortune next to Erwin Rommel, who went on to fight in the desert and then was forced by the Germans to commit suicide. And a little quote from Churchill next. He said he's an Englishman, but it was in Scotland that he got the 3 best things in his life: his wife, his constituency, and his regiment. And that's him in the First World War when he was commanding a battalion at the front. Right, we'll look to the next 6 months, January to June. So we're back to that one. Next, please. This is a famous old song based on something that apparently is medically correct. So the words come next. Hitler has only got 1 ball. Göring has 2 but very small. Himmler has something similar. And there you are. So that's the cartoon that goes with it in the book. Next one again, please. and then the second half of 1940. So you can see where your battalion and what they're doing, what's happening. The 54th Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders become a light anti-aircraft regiment, converting to Bofors guns. And during the Battle of Britain, they're in Manchester. And the 15th Battalion are sent to Aberdeen to guard the docks. There's records of football being played. And the 1st Battalion, interesting, there's a major victory at Sidi Barrani against the Italians. So you'll see next a picture of kilted soldiers marching, and these are Argylls, and then the next one is the conversion into an anti-aircraft regiment with illustration there. Now we'll look at into the first half of 1941. The 1st Battalion handle 46,000 prisoners, but then get sent to Crete and lose half of their numbers to paratroopers, Stukas, and getting captured when the Germans drop. There's a well-documented 61-mile march in Singapore. Made it into the local papers here. 6th Battalion are in Yorkshire, and they're re-equipping and becoming a medium machine gun unit. 7th Battalion are now in Scotland training. The Manchester light anti-aircraft factory defence is going on. The 15th Battalion gets sent to Orkney. The next picture shows the Italians being processed, Italian prisoners. Apparently the Italians would often pack a suitcase to be ready to be captured in the desert. So a gentlemanly way to surrender. The next shows people evacuated from Crete after the German aerial attack, which had the effect of reducing a huge part of the German transport fleet, the air transport fleet, but it was seen at the time as a great disaster and defeat for Britain. Next one is Lang Tam. Lang Tam Wimberley, if we can see him. He was given command of the 51st Highland Division. That's a very good portrait of him. Next, please. And this is a little insight. The division is reformed in 1940 out of the troops who were left out of battle, plus the people who'd managed to get back. And the command was changed. They were into home defense and training in case there was going to be an invasion from the Germans. And Ritchie, when he went to the Middle East, he recommended Wimberley. And Wimberley was a Highlander and insisted that officers and non-commissioned officers would have kilts. There would be pipe bands, Highland games, and he was called Tartan Tam. And there's a story that I haven't been able to prove, but I wish it was true. I'm sure it is. Divisions don't just depend on infantry units; they need specialists. And he was supposed to have gone through the army list looking for people with Scottish-sounding names. So you could be a fourth-generation Londoner, but you're called MacDonald, and you happen to be a radio specialist, and he would pluck you out and get you into the 51st Highland Division. So we'll look at the next time period. The 1st Battalion gets sent to Khartoum, would you believe? And then they become internal security, a GHQ, a General Headquarters Reserve. Partly, I think, that's because they looked smart in their kilts, and to have them outside the headquarters looked good when you had visitors, international visitors. The 2nd Battalion are in Singapore, and they're combined as a unit into what became known as the Plymouth Argylls. That's the Marines from the HMS Repulse and Renown. Repulse and Prince of Wales. My dad's ship was Prince of Wales. Why did I say Renown? They were the last across the causeway as the rear guard and finished up in prison with a diet of rice. The 93rd are now an anti-tank regiment, and their training was the 33 Tank Brigade. The 7th are in Scotland, retraining. The 54th are air defence, and it's raining. There's also bits of agriculture. They get sent to pick beets for some reason. And the 15th Battalion are into Scapa Flow, where they get reformed as the 2nd Battalion. Next, please. This is a famous picture. The other infantry division or units in the desert and through Italy, they called the 51st the highway decorators, because everywhere they went, they put up their division sign. They would paint up HD. There's even a place in North Africa where HD has been machine gunned into the rock face. And here's a little picture of them, posed picture of them charging over in the desert. Get your knees brown. And this is another little song. Kiss me goodnight, Sergeant Major. Tuck me in my little wooden bed. We all love you, Sergeant Major. When we hear you calling, show a leg. Nice hot cup of tea. Sergeant Major, be a mother to me. And this is a picture of Wimberley himself, a photograph with his men. And there's a great painting showing planning for the El Alamein battle, which is next. And if you look out, you can see that they have designated the various objective points with the names of towns that are known to men in the division. So we have Montrose, Forfar, Turriff, Dollar, Kintore, Creeth, Killin, Leven, Comrie. So each one of these, they've got the lines that they're trying to get to, the start line and then the following up lines. But each objective is designated for a town within the territory of the 51st Highland Division. And these are very accurate representations of the commanders who are in this O group as they listen to Lang Tam telling them what the plan is. And this is another rude song that I've suppressed the words of, but you can look them up. You can see the picture. Saw Jerry acting wary, thought I'd go and take a look. Look up Deutscher if you're interested in that one. And here's some Argylls in the desert, getting ready. The next time period is the back end of 1942. So again, following your battalion choice. The 1st Battalion is now not that happy because they're doing salvage work and they're involved in defending the docks. The 2nd Battalion are even less happy because they've got a terrible diet, they've got ulcers, they're building these bridges that are part of the whole Bridge of the River Kwai story. But they managed to snuggle in some bagpipes and they had Thai whiskey at Hogmanay. The 93rd, the Royal Artillery felt that everyone should be a member of the Royal Artillery, but the 93rd Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders Anti-Tank Regiment Royal Artillery felt that no, they are not members of the Royal Artillery. They insisted on pipes and drums, and they walked into the Royal Artillery base in their kilts. In Tunis, there was a memorable moment while they were all naked bathing in the Mediterranean and in their tin hats while there was an air raid going on. You can see the story of the rest of them. The new 2nd Battalion are in Scapa Flow, where they're doing coastal defence and they're getting drafts from other organisations. And here's a picture of some people in Orkney. And Orkney was famously not a popular place to be. If you can look at the next slide, you'll see why. There's hundreds of thousands of sailors, and the soldiers were there on boring defence duty. This is sung to the tune Katie Bairdy, if you know it. This bloody town's a bloody cuss, no bloody trains, no bloody bus, and no one cares for bloody us, bloody Orkney. If you go on down to the second last verse, no bloody sport, no bloody games, no bloody fun, the bloody Danes won't even give their bloody names, bloody Orkney. You can imagine that sentiment shared among the new 2nd Battalion. And the next picture shows you some Orkney weather. We'll look at the start of 1943 now. The 1st Battalion, even worse now, they're now into stevedore duties. So this is not joyful. The 2nd Battalion are there's a speedo, the Japanese, that's what they called it anyway, extra effort on the railway. They managed to get whiskey in for Hogmanay then as well, and after the previous Hogmanay, and there was, because there was fighting, the Japanese resorted to torturing them. 93rd Argyll and Sutherland's anti-tank regiment. They helped solve the American problem at Kasserine, and were given a place in the victory parade at Tunis with some of their 17-pounders, quick firing, excellent anti-tank guns. And the 7th were there as well in the victory parade there. The 51st Air Defence of Great Britain, and again the 2nd Battalion stuck in Scapa Flow. The situation in the Japanese prison camps was not happy. There's some exhibits in the Argyll Museum that show the state of people. That's showing some members of the Argylls walking along. And here's the cartoon from the Kiss Me Goodnight book. Waiting for something to happen. So they were there with their limited clothes and being shouted at by the Japanese officer. And then the classic Sodom All. The long and the short and the tall, sod all the sergeants and WO1, sod all the corporals and their blooming sons, for we're saying goodbye to them all. We'll look at the second half of 1943 now. Again, remember, your battalion number. The 1st Battalion get their kilts and they're back to headquarters duties in time for the international conference, so they could stand around and look smart. A Red Cross parcel arrives in the prison camp. They find a secret wire, they make a secret wireless. The 93rd are planning to use the M10s. These are American anti-tank tanks, basically. TUTs, tactical exercise without troops. That's officers going out into the country and planning how things are going to work. The American Dock Battalion went on strike and they had to take their place. Seems remarkable. Again, the 54th insisting again that they are members of the Argylls, issued tam o' shanters with badges, and that's them doing their beet harvesting that I mentioned. The second are in Morpeth, waterproofing their vehicles. We know why. Next, please. That's in the desert, in Sicily. And next we get to the song that Hamish Henderson wrote. And this is to the Farewell to the Creeks, which you will probably know. But it's interesting because he's got lots of insights in it. The pipe major is Fae. He's in communication with the fairies in some way. Or the Brecht Chalmers are eerie. Then fare ye well, ye banks of Sicily, fare ye well, ye valley and shore. There's nae jock will mourn the Kyle here. Pair bloody swaddies are weary. We say squaddy because we heard it wrong. He insists that it comes from the Indian army and it's sawaddy, which means a soldier. So they called them swaddies in the 1940s. We heard it as squaddy, and that's what we call them. And go to past halfway, you can see the difference in the pipe major, the pipey, who is in touch with the fairies. The pipey is dozy, the pipey is fae. But now we've got the drum major. The drummy is polished, the drummy is braw. He cannot be seen for his webbing and all. He's beesed himself up for a 40 and all, to leave with his Lola, his dearie. So their farewell, then tune the pipes and drub the tenor drum. Leave your kit the side of the wall, then tune the pipes and drub the tenor drum. Oh, the Brecht Chalmers are eerie. And when he wrote that, he knew, because he was an intelligence officer, he knew where the 51st Highland Division were going. They were not going, they were getting sent back to Britain to prepare for the Normandy landings. So some of these soldiers had been fighting in France 1940, then through the desert. They're now into 1943, and they fought through Sicily, and they're about to be sent back to Britain to get ready for the Normandy landing. So some of them are feeling they've done their bit. Thank you very much. Here's a Sicily picture, just fighting through. And we get the first half of 1944. The 1st Battalion are now fighting up through into the Battle of the Rapido in Italy. There's a Thai people are giving food in secret to the survivors of the 2nd Battalion. And they, in the prison camp, they arrange football leagues, and they have international matches between the different countries. The 93rd Anti-Tank Regiment, they've got self-propelled batteries of M10s that are anti-tank guns. And they've worked out a way of using them in harassing fire. You can look it up. The 7th Land at Courcelles, the 54th are looking into forward defence after D-Day, the air defence of Great Britain, ADGB. The brigadier keeps complaining about the fact they're wearing Argyll's badges and telling them they have to wear Royal Artillery badges, but it doesn't happen. Next, please. That's the 7th Battalion infantry company being led by a piper in Normandy. And then the famous D-Day Dodgers in Italy. So this is supposedly said by Lady Astor, who was the first woman to take her seat in Parliament. She wasn't the first woman elected. That was a Sinn Féin woman from Ireland called Markovich, who boasted about killing a policeman, but that's another story. But you can see the song. So it was said that she had accused the soldiers in Italy of dodging D-Day. I don't think it's not documented that she did, but this became a thing. And again, Hamish Henderson orchestrated this song. He claimed he didn't write it. It was brought together by different people. We're the D-Day. It's Lily Marlene is the music. We're the D-Day Dodgers out in Italy, always on the vino, always on the spree. 8th Army scroungers and their tanks. We live in Rome among the Yanks. We are the D-Day Dodgers way out in Italy. And then there's a bit, Dear Lady Astor, you think you know the lot, standing on a platform and talking bloody rot. You're England's sweetheart and her pride. We think your mouth's too bloody wide. That's from the D-Day Dodgers way out in Italy. She didn't go on well with Churchill. That's what she said. If you were my husband, I'd poison your tea. He said, if I was married to you, madam, I would drink it. Up there in the mountains, in the mud and rain, stand the scattered crosses, some that have no name. Heartbreak and toil and suffering gone, the boys beneath them slumber on. These are the D-Day Dodgers who'll stay in Italy. Next, please, Rose. Again, your battalion number, the 1st Battalion are now fighting heavily up through Italy. Wet, heavy casualties. Don't think of Italy as being very wet. It was very cold and very wet that winter. It's remarkable how bad some of the winters were in Europe during the Second World War. At the 2nd Battalion survivors, the Allied Air Force dropped bombs on the camp because the Japanese had not notified the Red Cross that it was a prison camp. They just looked at a military facility. So 90 soldiers were killed, prisoners, and 350 wounded. Just one of these things not much talked about, but even the cookhouse was destroyed. The half-tracks come in replacing the carriers, and they've got more M10s in the anti-tank regiment. 7th Battalion involved in Goodwood, Total Eyes, and the breakout after the 70-some days of the Normandy campaign, and then fight their way up into the Low Countries. Again, Air Defence Great Britain, ADGB, and they finish up on the River Seine. There's into Belgium from the new 2nd Battalion, cheering crowds, and they do another beating of the retreat. The battalion's pipe bands get called on all the time to do beating of the retreats. Next, please. That's the anti-aircraft unit. And the next picture will show the Argylls with one of the American anti-tank tanks. And the next is the classic Long Way to Tipperary. And it's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there. The next shows late in the war, an Argyll's unit. You can see the uniforms change slightly. The helmets are a bit different. Next again. So this is past. Again, there's a great picture of the 1st Battalion beating the retreat next to the Tower of Pisa. They waded across the river Senio. The prisoners of war are in even worse situations. Some are sent to Japan as slave labour. There's reports in Palestine where the anti-tank units sent of great Arab hospitality, but also thieving. So they liked it, but they kept having things getting nicked. And you can read the rest. Kangaroo in the last part is a Sherman tank with its turret taken off, used as an infantry transport. Next, please. A victory parade. You can see the victors represented by the appropriate sized flags. And then we have The Campbells Are Coming, which we won't sing, but we know the words. And then the last part, the 1st Battalion are now training to go to Japan because the war with Japan is still going on. There's, the prisoners of war are in very bad condition. But VJ Day happens and they get hospitalized and get to India. The anti-tank regiment are now deployed in Palestine where they're searching Jewish villages, and there's fighting now between French and Syrians, so they get sucked into that. 7th Battalion are forbidden from fraternizing. That wouldn't work, would it? You know, so there's lots of fraternizing going on. And fraternizing in Munster as well. Hamburg, there were the fanatics who would hang back and try and kill the soldiers, but then it turned into fraternization and inter-battalion football. The threat of getting sent to Asia after you've gone through all this must have been pretty depressing. The next picture touches on it. Thomas Cook, quaint local customs. They sat us down in the jungle and we had a very good look. And the next one shows some of the survivors. Happy to get out. And I've asked Roche to unmute us, although it's going to be chaotic, for the next song. So we should all join together. Would you like to unmute? So, is everybody unmuted?
A lot of us are, yeah.
Good. Scotland the Bridge. Hark when the night is falling, I hear the pipes are calling, loudly and proudly calling through the glen. There where the hills are sleeping, now feel the blood a-leaping, high as the spirit of the brave Highlandmen. Towering in gallantry, on mountain hill, high roads to the glorious they wave. Land of my heart, every land of the shining river, land of my heart, for Scotland. Excellent.
Very well done.
There's another couple of pictures and that's it.
Oh, well done, Jim. Well done.
The last one is that's Adolf, and then it's the Glengarry. That's it. Thanks very much.
Hey. Thank you very much. If I could ask everybody to give a lovely round of applause for another fantastic lecture there from Jim.
Hey.
Oh, I've really enjoyed that, honestly. A lot of times actually laughing out loud at some of the songs in it. I don't know, I would maybe like start after questions. Like, obviously songs were so important for the morale, when they tell such an interesting story when you really read the lyrics like that. Maybe not so much a question, just maybe an observation or a comment, but yeah, I think the songs were very important in the day for the troops.
I think also changing the words so they become rude songs, and adopting music, the number of parodies of the Lily Marlene song that there exists to that piece of music, and so it's an interesting one. I think you can imagine men on their own at night, nothing much to do. A tank unit leaguered up or whatever. But yeah, I think it's true.
Oh. David, I'll go around and mute everybody else in the room, but if you do have a question, just raise your hand. But David, if you like, go.
Jim, I'd just like to thank you for an absolutely excellent lecture there, and very well illustrated too. Just like to ask you if you're aware of this book, which was written by a member of our church congregation. It's An Infantry Officer with the 8th Army by Major H.P. Samuel MC. Samuel rather. Samuel was a member of our church congregation, Holy Trinity in Stirling. He was
Can
an
you show
officer.
the church? Can you show the picture? Can you show the
Yes.
book?
Yes.
The front cover?
Well, it's
An
just
infantry officer.
we do have a copy with
Right.
the dust jacket, but it's in the church. The dust jacket on this one's been lost. It was published in 1945 and never republished.
Right.
Samuel himself was killed in January 1945 in the Ardennes offensive. So he probably actually didn't see the book in print. But it's a tremendously interesting read. Samuel himself, he was also, where he's best known is he was a defending officer in the Salerno Mutiny. And one of the, there's a fair bit about him in the book by Saul David about the Salerno Mutiny. And one of the things I remember associated with him in the book was he said that General Wimberley had said to members of the 51st Highland Division, remember, you are 51st Highland Division men, don't let anyone send you anywhere else. And on the strength of that, a number of men who had been wounded or detached from their units for one reason or another had refused to be moved to other formations, mainly men of the 51st Highland Division and the 52nd Tyne-Tees Division. They were then put on. They were then court-martialed for mutiny, and Samuel was one of the defending officers. Lionel Dyches, Edinburgh lawyer, was the chief prosecuting officer. But Samuel, in his book, was always scathing about desk-bound staff officers who knew nothing about what conditions were like for fighting men. And that very much underpinned what he said in the Salerno, the Salerno court-martial. And also, he is absolutely scathing about the British administration in Sicily after Sicily's been occupied. Because what he says is, the administration was formed by officers seconded from various places. And he says, if you're a commander being asked to second people to take part in the administration, you're going to second the most useless officers that you most want rid of. And he said that became very, very apparent in the British administration in Sicily. But I have to say, it's a tremendous read. It is so little known because it was not republished after its initial publication in 1945. That was it. But it's a fantastic read.
That's a great recommendation. Thank you for that. There's a thing going on at the moment, a podcast that I follow called We Have Ways of Making You Talk. It's by James Holland and Al Murray, the pub landlord. James Holland, the historian of the Second World War, whose written work's great. And Al Murray has started reading free audiobooks from that are out of print, and the first one is available free about the Arnhem campaign, and it's well worth finding it. We Have Ways, and Zeno, it's called, the Cold. And this sounds like something that I'll fire to them as something, an out of print book that he could read, because he's doing that for the people who give him £6 a month. But the very first one, the Cauldron, it was free. It was before they worked out they could charge people for the privilege. But that's a great recommendation. The mutiny itself, I think not enough thoughts given to unit cohesion, small unit cohesion particularly, and to try and put injured soldiers who are coming back and send them to another unit. It's so thoughtless, and it's no wonder they objected. One of the things that James Holland, the points he makes, is that you're dealing with a democracy here. These people all have votes, and the officers have to treat them in a different way from the way that the Soviets treated their soldiers or the Nazis treated theirs. So it's just a piece of incompetence, really. People were sentenced to death, I think, but no, I think all that happened was that a couple of sergeants got demoted. But it was just very inconsiderate. And the same, I think it was the northeast of England. There's survivors from 2 divisions were threatened with this, and they just weren't having it.
No. There is, I don't want to hog too much time here, but there is another incident that Saul David describes. And this was following the conclusion of all the legal matters. There was a drinks party involving the various prosecuting and defending officers. And Samuel was one of a group which relieved Colonel Lionel Deiches of his trousers and threw him out into the street. Deiches being the chief prosecuting officer, but Deiches made no complaint, and it wasn't taken any further.
I think the technical term is debagging.
Yes. Apparently, Samuel went up to Deiches and told him that, in Samuel's opinion, Deiches represented the lowest form of life in the army. The desk-bound staff officer who knew nothing about what conditions were like for fighting men.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions around the room? If you can start, either unmute yourself, raise your hand, or you can type in the chat. David Spooner. Sorry, you'll have to unmute yourself, David.
It's not a question, just sharing a little thing. A while back when we lived in Dunblane, I was with Hamish Henderson, and he shared with me a photo of himself standing on top of his Jeep on the Appian Way just outside Rome with this salute. And it was just so typical of the guy. It was wonderful to see. So I just wanted to throw that in.
It's an interesting thing about him, because he was a communist. The communists would not serve in the regular army as such, but if they were conscripted, they would agree to become sappers. So they would build walls or structures. But it's only when the Germans betrayed the Soviet pact that Hamish Henderson went into the regular army. But remember, Clydebank was bombed by bombers with Russian oil. You know, the Soviets and the Germans were united at the time when Clydebank was bombed, when London was bombed, when Southampton was bombed. These were all being powered by oil from Russia. That was the pact between them. And it was only after Hitler betrayed the pact that Hamish Henderson joined the army effectively. But I've listened to him, I've read him, and I've even been to the place where the 51st, where he wrote the 51st Highland Division while we were in Sicily. So it's admirable, but at the same time, it's a little bit questionable at the start of the war, because Stalin said that Hitler was his pal.
Yeah.
Excellent. So are there any other questions from the room there? I don't think so. Well, I'd like to take this time to say again, thank you very much, Jim, for giving us a very entertaining, very lively lecture. Really enjoyed that. Next week we have David, which is the man next screen, talking about the Caledonian. Sorry, would you prefer to give a quick summarization of what you're going to talk about next week, David?
Yes, next week I'm doing basically an overview of the history of the Caledonian Railway, which was the main railway in Stirling up until the grouping of 1923. So really, it's to give a picture of what the company that was in fact Stirling's main railway, the railway that owned the Stirling railway station.
Yeah, really looking forward to that. So same time next week, same login details, and have a great weekend, as rainy as it is. And thank you all for coming along.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim.